Afternoon, folks. So this is the third in the series, Resurrection to Ascension, and I'm referring back to the first one. It was about the story of Mary of Magdalene, and I talked about that he was talking about ascension even before the 40 days from then when he's actually going to ascend. So he's talking about ascension on the very first day, and so if you look at we're going to look at the text here. It says, "Stop clinging to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father, but I go to my brethren. So, and say to them, I ascend to my Father and your Father, my God and your God." There's a bunch of clues going on in this passage here. So we talked about earlier the verb tense. So he says to her, "I've not yet ascended." So it's something's going to happen in the near future, and he doesn't want to be touched. He doesn't want her touching him. And but later we're gonna recognize he invites people to touch him. So something has changed from that moment to the next moment. So that gives us an idea of something's going to change. Now the address that he uses, he says, "My Father and your Father, my God and your God." That's who he's ascending to, which means he's actually coming in the same way that they would have to approach God, as not only as Father, because he's teaching people to think of God as Father, but also as God the authority. And so he's going to before God as the same way a human being would go before God. You see what I'm trying to say here? He has the very right to go before him as his dad, Abba Father, but he's going before him in a very formal way right now. So I believe, the book of Hebrews will talk about him going in and going into heaven, and it's previous to him sitting down. Now at the end of the ascension, when he goes to the ascension, he will sit. But you'll notice that Jesus is going to do some really different things in this study right after this that he doesn't do anywhere else. And so this is a very, very different thing. It's like he has a new position of authority, or a new position in the heavenlies. So we're going to look at that. So next thing we're going to look at is Luke chapter 22, verse 20. Luke chapter 22, verse 20. "In the same way, he took the cup after they'd eaten," and you guys will recognize this. Now, a lot of people don't know that this is not this time that Jesus is with his disciples. There's more than just a few holy days in the old Israeli calendar, and where Jesus is at the Feast of the Firstborn. And so this is actually right before Passover. It's actually the day before Passover, because Passover is the time when the firstborn of Egypt are going to die, and they're commemorating this with the firstborns because they were supposed to die, but they are going to be redeemed, and in reality they fast the day of Passover, and so this is a feast that's for them. And so Jesus is doing this new celebration that we look at as communion or Lord's Supper, in the feast of the firstborn. Him being the firstborn, of course, which is very appropriate. So he's before the Passover. He will die when the lambs die on Passover. That's when he will actually die, and then we'll talk about he'll be raised on a different day. So the same way he took the cup after they'd eaten, saying, "This cup which is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood." A very forthright statement, new statement. It's a brand spanking new statement. This cup, which is representative. This cup represents his blood, because it's not his blood, and the actual offering of his blood has not happened yet. So this is signatory. This is figurative. Okay, so the cup that we celebrate is the cup of the new covenant. So the new covenant is something that needs to be established. The old covenant has been established, and we're going to look at the establishing of the new covenant, because it's a legal process. It's just not, we just can't say, okay, old one's done. No, there has to be a ceremony. There has to be symbolism. There has to be things that have to be accomplished, and that's what we're going to look at next. So we're going to look at the day that Jesus is going to do this. The day that Jesus is going to do this is another holy day. It's a special day, and this is called the Wave Sheaf Offering Day. You can look that up on Google it. It's and on the third hour of that day. Now Jesus was talking to Mary early in the morning, probably between 7 and 8 o'clock, maybe earlier. But on that day, there's a very special thing. The priest walks out before all the people. He's inspected a sheaf of barley, and if the sheaf of barley has fruited, which means it's ready to harvest, then he will wave it in front of the people before the Lord. He will wave that sheaf before the Lord, which means we're presenting to you, God, the first fruits of the harvest, that you might bless the harvest. Okay, and then immediately after that, there's a 1-year-old lamb without blemish who is offered for a sanctification of the harvest. So obviously that brings to mind the lamb sacrificed as a burnt offering, completely burned up. That means his aroma, the smell of the lamb being offered, would now rise up to heaven. So this sheaf offering, which is the beginning of the harvest, symbolically talks about the harvest of the church. So there's two harvests. There's the harvest that we're going to see. This pre-speaks to the harvest that's going to happen in Pentecost. But before the harvest that happens at Pentecost, we have to have the pre-harvest of the workers that have to be ready. And see, this is what this is what our next gathering about, is becoming ready for the harvest. When God wants to harvest, he has to have people ready, who've studied, who've prayed, who prepared their hearts to be priests to the people, to administer the elements of the new covenant. So that's what's going to happen. So we're going to look at Hebrews right now and just look at what is actually happening in this ceremony that establishes the new covenant. So bear with me. We're going to go through Hebrews. We're going to try to do it quickly. I'm not going to read every word. I'm just going to hit highlights of certain verses. It would be well for you to go ahead and read this to yourself and get the whole idea of what's going on from before chapter 8 into chapter 10. So starting in chapter 8, I'm going to look at the exact language of the new covenant. So starting about a quarter of the way through verse 10, after those days, says the Lord. Okay, so boom. Here's the elements, and we're going to highlight them. I will put my laws into their minds. That's one of the major elements. God's placing laws in our minds. I will write them upon their hearts. So God is not going to have them in our mind. Mind goes blank sometimes, so he's going to write them on our heart so our mind can read our heart. Okay? And I will be their God, and they will be my people. That's one of the primary things God wants accomplished on the earth, is a people that he is the God of, and they are the people of him. And there's a special relationship right there. And that he wants that relationship, okay? And everyone shall not teach everyone his fellow citizen and everyone his brother, saying, know the Lord. So there's not going to be a hierarchy. That's going away. There can't be priests up here that tell you how to think. There can't be these guys up here telling you how to understand. No. So something else is going to happen. It says here, for all shall know me, from the least to the greatest of them. So God is going to make himself known to every single person in this group that he's talking about. Every single person will know him. He won't have to go to Dawn to find out about God. He won't have to go to someone else to find out about God. God is there to talk to you personally, okay? And what is the first thing you're going to talk about? Of course, I will be merciful to their iniquities. Iniquities, the difference between a sin could be on purpose or it could be an accident, okay? Because it's just doing things and it's just kind of that. But iniquity is deeper than that, because it's planned and it's part of you, and sin is the iniquity of you works out sin as a natural expression of it being inside you. So sin is what happens, but iniquity is what drives it, okay? and God is going to talk to you about your iniquity and your sin. And because he's been talking to you, you're going to know him. Okay? So this is the elements of the new covenant, very personal thing. The kingdom of God is a very personal thing. And in verse 13, when he said a new covenant, he made the first one obsolete. That means the old covenant is obsolete. It is not, it doesn't apply to you and I anymore. He has made it obsolete, but whatever is becoming obsolete and growing old is ready to disappear. I mean, there will be no, at some point, it won't even be in mind, because the new covenant is the only thing that we relate to God in. But it has its point now, because in another place it will say the old covenant was our schoolmaster bringing us to Christ. So it has a residual role in the world today, and it's not to be thrown out completely. It has a residual role, but it is not the point of our relationship with God. Now we're going back to the establishment of the new covenant. So we're going to go to chapter 8, verse 3. It talks about a priest has to come to God with an offering. He can't come empty-handed. God does not let a high priest come before him having something to offer. So that's what it says in verse 3. And it says in verse 4, Jesus on earth is not a priest at all. He can't be, because it violates the law. So he can't even come in the tabernacle on the earth as a temple, because he's not qualified. But you've got to take into account that when Moses made the tabernacle, he made a copy of what was in the heavens. And God said, and it's a quote from the Old Testament, "You shall make all things according to the pattern which was shown you on the mountain." So Moses went up on the mountain to God, and God showed him the heavenly tabernacle. And he looked at it, and it burned into his mind. And when he went down, he made it just like that, because that was established first, and that was not made with hands. And we'll see that before. And so in verse 6, so Jesus, because he didn't go to an earthly tabernacle, he went to the heavenly one, he has obtained a more excellent ministry. More excellent, because it's built on better promises. Okay? So we could go into that, but we're not. So sorry. So where are we now? Now we're jumping to verse 11. No, we're talking to chapter 9, verse 11. So now is a different part. So what we passed over, those were examples of what happened in the Old Testament for us to look at and know that was a pattern that was set. And now this one is going to happen in much the same way. So in chapter 9, verse 11, when Christ appeared as the high priest of the good things to come, okay, so this is going to happen now. This is the moment. Boom. This is the moment. Jesus has appeared, like at the door, at the gate, okay? So he's there. He entered through the greater and more perfect tabernacle. It looks like you have to go through the tabernacle and get to something on the other side. And it's not made with hands. It's not of this creation. Okay, it's not a part of earth at all. This is all 100% heavenly. Okay, and verse 12, he didn't come. He had blood, but it wasn't the blood of goats and calves. Now the blood of goats and calves was the blood that Moses used. And we'll see that later. He entered the holy place once and all, having obtained eternal redemption. So he did something. His sacrifice was so impactful that it was eternal redemption. Okay, so I don't want to get out of place here. So jump to verse 20. So in the old picture, there was the blood of the first covenant, and it was the blood of calves and goats. Okay, and in verse 21, Moses sprinkled it on everything. On everything. When he walked into the tabernacle, that blood went everywhere. It was on everything, and they never washed it off. They never washed it off, because that was the blood of the covenant. That established it. That made it. That first day, from that day on, it was it. That was the agreement between God and man, right there. It was the establishment of that agreement. Okay, and all those were pictures. Okay, so we're not going into that right now, but get this in your mind. He took that blood and he put it on everything. And why? It says 22. According to the law, one must say all things are cleansed with blood. You got to say that. And without the shedding of blood, there's no forgiveness. Because before that, this thing is covered with the sin, just because of people. Because of people, this thing's covered with sin. And so now it has to be marked with the blood of the new covenant. And now that blood of the new covenant supersedes the sin. So it overwhelms and supersedes the sin. And then we go to verse 23. So it was necessary for the things in heaven to be cleansed. Why are the things in heaven need to be cleansed? There's no people up there sinning. It's because that's where the heavenly approach, the mental approach, the spiritual approach to God is. It's for people. It's all about for people. They don't need it for angels. This is all set up for people, and this is all set up for the new covenant. This is all set up for Jesus to go through. And these things have to be cleansed by blood. So guess what? This blood that Jesus carries, which is his own personal blood, I don't know how they did that, but I know they do because it says it right there. He cleansed those things with his blood. So when that tabernacle is walked into in heaven, it's marked. It's marked with Jesus' blood. Everything you see has got Jesus' blood marking it. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. In heaven, it's marked. Okay, and let's see. Where's my notes? So these heavenly things were cleansed for purpose of dealing with sin. Okay, these purposes. And 25, 24. Okay, so he did not enter the holy place made with hands, a copy, but the true one, to appear in the presence of God. Okay, so as he walked through that thing in the old tabernacle, there was a thing at the back of the Holy of Holies, and there's God sitting on a throne, the seat of the Holy of Holies, and he's surrounded by the archangels. Okay, so when you walk through the tabernacle, not made with hands, at the other end of it, it's like a tent. You walk through it. Remember, he's walking through it. You stand right in front of God, and he's standing in front of God for us at this moment. And I think this is the moment he was established as the great high priest over the church. So it says in verse 25 that nor was it that he should offer himself often as the high priest. So this is a picture of what the high priest did. He entered the holy place year by year with blood not his own. So the earthly high priest had to do this every year to reestablish his role as the high priest for the next year. And if he didn't come worthy, he'd drop dead, and they'd have to drag him out with a rope. Okay, Jesus only had to do that once. He only did that once, and so his standing as the great high priest of the new covenant is established at that moment, whenever that moment was. And I kind of believe that it happened that first day that he rose up and he went and took care of this, and then he came back and started taking care of other stuff. That's how Jesus is. He's a carpenter. So one thing, you get one thing done, boom, you got to do another thing, because this house has got to be built. And that's the way carpenters are. They're moving all the time. If you ever watch carpenters out there, they're moving all the time, just like a bunch of ants. Okay? Well, Jesus is just like that. He's a carpenter. God raised him as a carpenter just so he'd learn that process. And now he's going to get one thing done, and boom, he's going to move to another. So God bless you, and I hope this blesses you.